I want to welcome you to the June 16th, 2024 message here at Meadowbrook Baptist Church for Father's Day. Happy Father's Day out there, everyone. We're going to look at the topic of desperate dads from John chapter 4, verses 43 through 54. John Crowley is the Chief Executive Officer of BIO, that is Biotechnology Innovation Organization, the world's largest biotech advocacy organization. He is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and also holds a law degree from Notre Dame. 30 years ago, John Crowley, at the age of 27, was becoming quite a successful litigator in Indianapolis at a well-known firm there. But in 1996, his life changed when he and his wife became quite concerned about their 15-month-old daughter, Megan. She couldn't pull herself up at 15 months, and she couldn't pull herself up and let alone walk. Something was wrong. What really got their attention is that when their son Patrick was just seven days old, they received at the same time a report that contained a devastating diagnosis for Megan, that she had been diagnosed with a glycogen storage disease called Pompe, P-O-M-P-E syndrome. It's a genetic disorder that causes progressive muscle weakness in your muscles, particularly your heart muscle. And it is caused by a lack of enzymes in your muscles, an important enzyme in your muscle that breaks down sugar in the muscle cells throughout the body. He found out as well that both he and his wife were genetic carriers of Pompe syndrome, which is a very rare disease, and children who have that disease rarely make it out of even being a preschooler age. What also worried them is, did their newborn son Patrick also have Pompe syndrome, which he did and he does. But at the age of 2 years old, Megan had to go on a ventilator. Her heart was so weak. The specialist for this disease was in Princeton, New Jersey. And for 6 weeks, she was on the ventilator there. And at that point, John and his wife made an important decision that they were going to do everything that they could. They would give up their jobs. They would move to New Jersey, where their children could be cared for, and where John was determined he would begin to work on a cure for his children's glycogen deficiency disease called Pompe syndrome. After moving to New Jersey, he got a job with a pharmaceutical company that specialized in genetic therapy treatments. And then shortly thereafter that, in 2000, he started his own biotech company. And somewhere along there, he also got an MBA from a college as well. He wanted to run an efficient business that would find the cure. He formed this new company called Novozyme, from the word enzyme, to find this therapy, which they did. I think the actual cure was called, or not the cure, but the treatment that they found, the enzyme replacement therapy, was called Novozyme. And every other week, beginning around 2005, they started putting Megan and Patrick on bi-weekly infusions of Novozyme, and it was able to reverse the effects on their hearts. But it just held it at the same level, and they decided to do more. And he sold his company and got it to Genentech, and then he eventually started biotech. The story of this desperate dad was written down in the book written by Pulitzer Prize winning author Geeta Anand called The Cure: How a Father Raised $100 million and Bucked the Medical Establishment in a Quest to Save His Children. In 2010, Harrison Ford directed and acted in a movie based on John Crowley and his wife's story to go to extreme measures to find a cure or therapy for their children. And the movie was called Extreme Measures. Desperate dads, and moms for that matter, will do whatever they can to help their kids and family. When someone is truly desperate, that means they are earnestly, maybe even frantic, but they are intent. They realize their great need, and they are searching for help. They're at a point of desperation. Desperate dads have a great opportunity to lead their whole households to put their faith, to find faith and life in Jesus. Today on Father's Day, I want to look at a desperate dad in the Bible, desperate for a cure for his dying son, who went and found Jesus Christ, but not only found healing in a most amazing way for his son, but he also found faith for his whole family in Jesus Christ. Desperate dads and moms need to and can discover that Jesus is the answer for the families, for the family life. Not just for physical healing, but for real life. Here at Meadowbrook Baptist Church, our vision is helping people find life here in Jesus Christ. And we live in a world where there are many desperate people, but the only answer for desperate dads, desperate sons, and desperate daughters is found in Jesus Christ. We're going to read about this desperate dad now in John chapter 4, verses 43 through 54. John 4, 43 through 54, where it says, "After the 2 days, he left for Galilee. Now Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. When he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. They had seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, for they also had been there. Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death." You might say he was the desperate dad. Jesus had told him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe." The royal official said, "Sir, come down before my child dies." "Go," Jesus replied, "your son will live." The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servants met him and with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, "Yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him." Then the father realized that this was the exact hour, the exact time at what Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." So he and his whole household believed. This was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. John 4 starts off with a more familiar passage of Jesus and the woman at the well. And after her encounter with Jesus, she leaves her water pot there at the well, and she goes into the village of Sychar, the Samaritan village of Sychar, and says to the crowd, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did." And they listened to her and they believed her. And then in verse 42, then after Jesus had spent 2 days with them, then they said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." Now the Gospel of John and this passage that we just read about this desperate dad is all geared towards getting people to believe in who Jesus is, to take him at his word. I want to tell you that is where hope lies today. In putting your faith in Jesus' word and trusting in him. There's no other answer. John wrote in John 20:31, towards almost next to last chapter, he said there's a lot of things that I could tell you about what Jesus did, but then he says here, "But these are written that you may believe, and that by believing you will have life in his name." We believe, folks, here at Meadowbrook Baptist Church, that you find life here in Jesus. Jesus said in John 10, "The thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy, but I am come that you might have life and have it to the full." We want people, and we know that Jesus wants people to find life to the full. This desperate dad needed to discover this fact and find faith. It says here in verse 46, "Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine." That was this first major sign that he did at Cana. Now he's come back to Cana, that same spot where he did this first major sign. A sign, like a road sign out there, a sign is meant to point people towards, Auburn, 5 miles ahead, or to give information, but it points to something. And these miracles were signs that were supposed to point people to the fact, and did, that Jesus is God's Son, the Savior of the world, just as the Samaritans came to believe. But as he came to Cana this second time and arrived there, there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. Now, this royal official, literally in Greek, it's a word I only mention it's basilikos. We are familiar with the basilicas, these churches, usually a Catholic church. A basilica, it's a fancy building. But that was a term used in Rome to describe an official building of the empire. It was the local administrative building where they would have judges sit and where town meetings might be held. But basilikos, it stands for an official of the king. Now the king was King Herod Antipas, the son of King Herod the Great, that tried to kill the baby Jesus. The wise men came to King Herod. This is King Herod's son, King Herod Antipas. Now notice, if you're a royal official, you'd think, well, maybe the king's doctors could look at my son and help him. I want to tell you, when this man heard about Jesus and all that he had done, he knew that Jesus was his only hope for his son. Now, he was a royal official, but at this point, he realized his most important business was his son, was his dying son. And he had an important position, official of the king. But desperate dads realize that their most important work is with their family. When there's a crisis that usually brings us to the forefront, they wake up and they realize, I need to take care of my family. This man had a son that was dying. Back on Father's Day 2019, actually the Saturday before Father's Day 2019, a young 31-year-old father of four, Christopher Schultz, was walking with his family in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. They were walking along this bridge that went over a river there, and his 3-year-old son, Ashton, climbed through you know how fast they are, just in an instant, he went through the rails and fell into the water. His dad saw his son going down. He jumped into the river and found his son, held him up to someone that had waited out from shore to grab the toddler. But Christopher Schultz, his 31-year-old dad, was taken under by the current. They found him about an hour later downstream, dead. But let me tell you, I and any other desperate dad would do the same thing. This royal official was a desperate dad. His son was dying, and when he heard about Jesus, he believed that Jesus was the answer. And that's how you get on the right track, folks, when you realize that Jesus is your only hope. You might be having a desperate financial situation this Father's Day. You might be having a desperate health situation this Father's Day. But desperate people turn to the Lord and put their faith in Him. I love being your pastor here at Meadowbrook, but I want to tell you my most important concern is for my family. Desperate dads realize that this royal official and his family lived in Capernaum, which was 25 miles east of Cana on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Now, Galilee was low, your Capernaum was down by the sea level, whereas Galilee and Cana of Galilee was 25 miles uphill to the west of Cana. This royal official, I don't know if he had a chariot or a horse, or I want to think he would have crawled on his knees, but he takes this 25-mile journey, I believe walking, maybe at times running, to find Jesus before his son died. I ran across a video as I was looking about desperate dads this week of a 96-year-old man named Victor Colella. Well, he was 96 years old a couple years ago. He was in traffic court in Providence, Rhode Island before Judge Frank Caprio. Victor Colella had been ticketed with a very heavy fine for driving over the speed limit in a school zone. Actually, he was driving 30 miles per hour in the school zone. And the judge said, well, what do you have to say, sir? And the man explained, I don't often drive. In fact, I usually wait till after 10 o'clock in the morning when it's a lot lighter so I can see better, and I'm very careful. But every other week, I take my 64-year-old son, Richard, to get his blood drawn and get a cancer treatment. He's dying. And that day, I don't know, he said, I was just going a few miles above the speed limit, but I can't afford this. The judge, as he realized the situation, that this 96-year-old man, 96 years old, was still doing all that he could to help his dying son. And the judge covered the man. The fines had to be paid, but he had a special fund that he covered this 96-year-old dad's fine with. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to find Jesus. And he was doing the only thing he knew to do, and the only answer that he knew, he had to find Jesus. I hope that in your life, all of us in our lives have already reached that point. It doesn't have to be a health emergency, but hopefully we realize that how much we desperately need Jesus for life. But I understand as a dad, when your kids are sick. I have 3 daughters. I know Rachel, my middle daughter, had a lot of breathing issues growing up, and then she would get a high fever. And I tell you, if it was 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning, I didn't care. I called that doctor's number. And if that wasn't enough, and they would have an answering service and a doctor on call would call us. It didn't matter what time. When my daughter needs something, I'm going to do something about it. When Rebecca tore her ulnar crucial ligament here, the Tommy John, when they had Tommy John surgery, we went to a doctor here, but then I wanted a second opinion. I went took Becca down to St. Louis, to the St. Louis Cardinals doctor, one of them, Dr. Paletta, who has done hundreds of Tommy John surgeries. When it comes to your kids, we'll do anything to help them. This man goes and he finds Jesus and he begs him. I almost want to think this royal official might have even got down on his knees and begged him, come and heal my son, he's dying. Folks, without Jesus, our families are in a desperate situation. Your families are healthy, and I hope they are today. But folks, more than ever, we desperately need Jesus in our families, in our lives. Now, Jesus' response in verse 48 might seem a little bit harsh. He says, unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. Now, when back in 43, verse 43 or so, we were reading, it says, man, when they heard Jesus was back in Cana, people were coming out of the woodwork because they had heard of all the things he had done during the Passover feast down in Jerusalem. And some were talking about the miracle of change of water into wine there at Cana. And man, the crowd, they came out of the woodwork. They wanted to see him do another miracle. And they believed that Jesus would do a miracle. And they wanted to see some more miracles. This man, he says, come, heal my son. He's about to die. And Jesus says this. He said, what? But folks, Jesus desperately wants us to know who he really is and the greater healing that he came to bring this man and his son and his whole household. He said, unless you see a sign or signs and wonders, you'll never believe. The man, however, said, sir, come down before my child dies. And Jesus responded, saying, go, your son will live. The man had thought that Jesus needed to come with him. Come on down, go down here. I need your help, I need it now. Perhaps have your dads ever got a call from maybe one of your kids and you said, I wonder what they need now, or I wonder what's wrong now. Now, there's nothing wrong with going to Jesus with a sick child, or when you're in financial trouble. That should be the beginning spot. But folks, Jesus is calling us to a deeper faith, to trust in him and his word and his mission and the fact that he is the Son of God and our Savior. He wants a personal relationship with us. As desperate as this man's son's physical need was at the moment, there was a greater thing at stake, this man's very soul and his son's soul. Jesus desperately wanted him to trust in him as Lord and Savior. He says, go, your son will live. And folks, that statement, your son will live, kind of gives me the goosebumps. What a message. Your son will live. But I think it was a deeper message than your son is just going to recover from this high fever. He wanted this man's son to find real life. He wanted the man to find real life. He says, go, your son will live. And it says, the man, verse 50, took Jesus at his word and departed. He took Jesus at his word and departed. Back in the 1500s in England, throughout the British Empire at that time, there weren't, typically they didn't use a lot of written contracts. You know, we're used to having typewriters and paper available. Usually, a lot of times, business was done on someone's word. And there was a popular phrase that was made, I don't know if it was a king or someone said, an Englishman's word is his bond, is his security. It means if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to be there. And that ought to be the way we should practice in real life. Of course, long, before all these contracts and the page after page of contracts and the fine print, a handshake and a man's word was his bond. And that ought to be the way, if you say, I guarantee it, if you say, I'll do it, then a man will do it. Or a woman, or a boy, or a girl. When you give your word. Jesus gave this desperate dad his word, and he wants to give you his word today, that if you believe in him and take him at his word, you will live. He took him at his word. And he started on his way back. And I believe that as he walked around, he held on to those words in his mind. Go, and your son will live. Go, and your son will live. I'm going. He says, my son will live. How can he know that? Go, and your son will live. He walked mile after mile, 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile, 4 mile, 5 mile, and about halfway home, off in the distance, he sees a group of men in a hurry. The dust is rising, and these guys are on their way, and as they got closer, this man realized that was his servant. And I don't know if all of a sudden maybe he was worried. Maybe they're coming to tell me my son is dead. But as they got closer, he began, maybe my son is living. And he begins running towards them. And servants run with the good news. They tell him, your son is alive. The fever has went away. Folks, back in verse 41 again, it says the Samaritan people, it says because of his words, many more became believers. Folks, coming to a point of faith, desperate people must come finally to the point of faith that I've got to trust in what Jesus says for my life. And when you do it like this, Dad, when you take him at his word, you trust and obey, he will bring life to you and your family. And while, he was on his way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. Can you imagine this man? The joy that he had when he heard this news. And he asked, as the wheels were turning in his heart and mind, he asked his servants, "What time did my son get better?" And they said, "Yesterday at 1 in the afternoon, the fever left him." And this desperate dad, this royal official of King Herod, realized that was the very moment at which Jesus had given his word, "Go and your son will live." And at that moment, this man's life was changed. Not just was his son healed of a fever, but he realized Jesus was much more than a miracle worker. Sometimes desperate people were just wanting a miracle, and once everything's going fine, we'll go on our way. But desperate dads realize that they need him every day, every hour, and they must put their hope in his word. They must. It says here, then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus said to him, "Your son will live." And it says, so he and his whole household believed. Several years ago, Lifeway Research did a statistical study on how families come to church. They found out that if a child gets saved at vacation, Bible school, or camp, whatever, he's the first one to get saved. About 3.5% of the time, the rest of his family comes to the church, and they get saved. They also looked about mothers accepting Christ. They found out that when a mother gets saved, about 17% of the time, the rest of the family comes. But the most amazing statistic is that when a father gets saved, 93% of the time, the family will follow him in faith. That's what happened here. Dads, when we desperately seek Jesus and find faith in him, we can lead our whole families to faith and life in Jesus. Over and over again in the Bible that happened. In Acts 16, when the Philippian jailer got saved, Paul and Silas were in the jail, the earthquake and everything, that he believed in the Lord, and it says he and his whole household believed. Just the same words as here. In Acts 18:8, when Paul went to Corinth, it says, Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord. Dads, you're powerful. Your influence is powerful and needed and necessary. It makes a major impact in so many ways. But when you get desperate enough, you realize I need the Lord and my family needs the Lord, and you get saved, guess what? Not only you saved, but there's a good possibility that the rest of your family will follow your example and get saved as well. Romans 16:10 and 11 mentions the households of two dads named Aristobulus and Narcissus. In 1 Corinthians, we find that Paul baptized the whole household of Stephanas. 1 Corinthians 16:15 says, you know that the household of Stephanas were the first converts in Achaia, and that they have devoted themselves to the service of the Lord's people. This whole family, Stephanas, the dad, got saved. His whole family got saved, and they were making a major impact in that entire province around Achaia. Twice Paul makes mention of a household of a man named Onesiphorus, and I think it's maybe in Philippians. But when dads become desperate and they realize that they need Jesus, not just to heal their son of a fever, but their families need Jesus, and they find Jesus, folks, they lead their whole family to faith and life in Jesus as well. This royal official who served King Herod found a new king named Jesus, the Son of God. He took Jesus at his word and believed. He trusted and obeyed. He found Jesus more than a miracle worker, but indeed the Messiah, the promised king. My question as you celebrate Father's Day today, are you desperate for Jesus? Oh, you say, I have this health need, I have this financial need. Yes, let's take that to Jesus, but Jesus says, it's more than that. I want you to take me at my word and put your faith in me as Lord and Savior. Are you ready to take him at his word and believe?